I would now like to introduce today's presenters. Ronak Doshi is a partner in the technology practice covering digital transformation and applications. In this role, Ronak covers horizontal technology areas such as AI, APIs, blockchain, data and analytics, and enterprise applications. Yugal Joshi, partner, is the Everest Group's business leader for technology services, research, and advisory memberships, which include multiple programs such as applications, cloud services, digital, and platforms. Pranati Dave, practice director, is responsible for leading Everest Group's BFS IT services and technology research program. She has broad experience advising BFS enterprises and service providers on technology sourcing, technology-led operations transformation, and go-to-market strategies. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Ronak.
Hey, thank you. And again, thank you everyone for joining us. So I thought we will start today's discussion with a quick poll. And again, this is an interesting one, hopefully a fun one for everyone. We wanted to understand what are your biggest fears with something like an emerging technology of Web 3.0 and Metaverse. And let's see what kind of responses start coming in, right? Which is, okay, we already started to see some responses coming in. Very interesting one, right? So is it a fear of detachment? Is it a fear of abandonment? Is it a fear of missing out? Are we seeing fear of losing someone you like? Or is it a fear of derealization? And I don't want to kind of spill the beans, but I'm starting to get the results, which is very interesting. And it's kind of swinging between the questions. And again, now it's kind of going towards one direction. Okay, that's interesting. We'll keep the poll open for a few more seconds so that everybody is able to respond to the question. Okay, so we have our winner here. So the fear of derealization, which is if we will lose touch with reality, is the biggest one. So the fear of virtual reality is losing touch with reality. Amazing. And the second one is actually my personal favorite, which is the fear of missing out. Because I always feel if everybody's on those coolest virtual worlds and kind of dealing with all of those NFTs and assets, and if I'm not, I might miss out. So I think that's there. And the fear of detachment was the third largest one. So again, thank you all for responding for this fun question. As we start today's discussion, we definitely wanted to start with talking about Web 3.0 and Metaverse, and who other than our resident expert, Yugal Joshi, to take us through the key message and the definition of what it is. Yugal, over to you.
Yeah, so I think actually I wanted to know in the survey whether they are real people filling or there are avatars as well. I did not get that. I did not get that answer, but I'll assume that there were, we coined this term called making virtual as virtual, right? So you have virtual and real world coming together, making a virtual world where you do not, I mean, yes, it is scary. You do not know where the reality starts, where the reality ends. But now coming to this Web 3 and Metaverse, and some of you said that fear of missing out, though yes, that was said in jest, but I think that point is very important, because given the technology disruption that is happening, as consumer of technology or as a provider of technology, these days we do not get chance to recover. So what does it mean? It means that irrespective of whether you are cynical about these things or you are a cheerleader, you will have to experiment. And you cannot experiment on your own. So you will have to bring an ecosystem into play so that you can start early and then experiment. And the reason being, if you go back, let's say when the World Wide Web, the internet was really getting traction around 2 decades back, there were cases where a lot of enterprises thought whether they needed internet. And now, if you think about those days, it looks surreal that people can actually think about that, because internet completely changed the world. We believe we are at the cusp of very similar. Now, how this entire world pans out, right? Web 3.0 and Metaverse, I think the time will tell. But one thing we would want to leave you as a fundamental message from this session is that you will have to start somewhere, start soon, experiment with these cool evolving technologies and the ecosystem, and bring the right partners. So if we move on, right? So in general, we will do some demystification around, okay, what do we think Web 3.0 and Metaverse are, and then, you know, if we move ahead, I know there are like hundreds of definition out there, so we wanted to do service to the humanity by adding one more. But I think this is important, and the reason this is important is because it sets some kind of context, and one of the contexts we definitely want to set is that at Everest Group, we do not view Web 3.0 as only as an evolution of internet. I think what we are very fascinated about, the concepts of decentralization, autonomous and distributed technologies, and then how they can impact enterprise technology landscape, but more than that, how they can be used to fundamentally, if you will, reimagine an enterprise. How can you use some of these concepts, some of these technologies to completely change what you were, let's say, 5 years ago? You know, platforms like cloud have already started that journey, and Web 3.0, Metaverse are going to push it further. From a Metaverse perspective, I believe, you know, all the pandemic, of course, influenced it, but then we think it to be almost like an immersive space, an intelligent immersive space. So we are just not talking about a virtual event, but you know, intelligent immersive space which is smart. And then the point I earlier made, the concept of coming together of the virtual and the real world, creating the virtual real world. Okay, I can take my experience from my virtual world to the real world, and vice versa. There are, of course, multiple enabling technologies. We keep hearing about them, you know, be it NFTs, blockchain, 5G, DeFi, DApps, and so on. But these are the fundamental building blocks of Web 3.0 and Metaverse, which we need to understand better. So if I ask just Pranati, you know, you have tracked this space for such a long time. What's your view on this?
Yeah, you could. Thank you for the context around you know, the definition, and you know, this is something which we are taking, you know, very aggressively to the market. Our research suggests that you know, you gladly brought out that point around experimentation. So the experimentation around Metaverse, around Web 3.0, that has been significant. We see adoption happening in pockets across industries. Just a couple of days back, just 2 days back, Meta, they launched their Metaverse digital clothing store. So users can now purchase pieces of their clothing for, you know, for the avatars in its Metaverse. So, and we believe that as adoption scales across industry, we see a growing evolution of, you know, product innovation, experience innovation, and last but not least, the overall business model will see an evolution. As products evolve due to, you know, Web 3.0 and Metaverse, we will see emergence of, you know, not just, you know, newer products that are focused on, you know, be it payments, be it financial services, be it personal finance, but newer channels are going to emerge. So and overall, you know, the environment will be is going to be fostered to test some of these concepts. And now we are in a place where human-centered design itself is evolving. And to realize the full potential of some of these technologies, a business model evolution is going to be very, very central. What that means is some of your existing processes will not exist. Some of your existing processes may become more efficient, more streamlined. And there are two salient priorities emerging out of this dynamic. And this is coming from a very business focused lens, that how do we enhance the overall customer experience, and how do we make the access for a user easy? How do we enable the ease of access? If we explore some of the examples such as Walmart and Nike, Nike, they launched their Nike Land on a gaming platform. The intent is to serve the virtual and e-commerce customer segments. So that's where a lot of the activity is happening, but we see bits and pieces of it happening across the industry. I think that will bring us to a very deeper dive on what is happening in the financial services space. So organizations such as HSBC and JPMC, they have taken some of the first steps towards building a very efficient future, a very customer-oriented future, investor-oriented future, and it is driven by this unmet consumer need. Hence, this makes us conclude that the overall value realization may come from different pockets. But yes, we see experimentation happening in sort of the right intent. So Web3 is going to see a proliferation of software platforms that sit on top of blockchain. They may also have an upside, and a potential to gain upside in the growing Web3 world. As clarity around digital assets will also be, we will see that also evolve. Whether investors want to go ahead with the stable coin or NFTs, the investor, regulator, the enterprise maturity, all of that is going to evolve. And I think that is going to create a very, very interesting dynamic. And gradually we'll move towards a place where we'll see significant value realization happening. Ronak, I believe you would want to touch base on the newer economic and business models that are emerging.
No, absolutely. And again, I think one of the things we are seeing, right, again, as you said, right, there is experimentation happening on all of these, right? With JP Morgan on Decentraland, HSBC on Sandbox, these early experimentation, the learning, that the core message that Yugal said is going to be very critical. And as we think about experimentation, as we learn about the technology, how do we bring all of those different components together is going to be very important. But one thing to do as an analyst out here is we need to debunk some myths and also talk about what that true value lies, right? So again, there are pieces of Web3 and Metaverse I am really personally excited about, and there are pieces which I definitely would want to have some caution as we kind of think about it. For us, as I think Pranati, you mentioned, right, there is this entire experience innovation that we're going to see thanks to Web3 and Metaverse. I think that gets me really excited. It's expansion of the number of channels that you can go after. It's a new customer interaction method. We are able to kind of engage customers where they are present. So if they are present on a gaming channel, they want to look at fashion shows virtually, they want to look at events that are happening globally, you can do that. Right. So again, somebody like Samsung wanting to launch all their products in a metaverse kind of a virtual event, they're able to now do that. So it's a next generation of engagement and experience. It's the evolution from brick and mortar to e-commerce to social commerce to a virtual reality based commerce model, which we are seeing. So the ability to engage customers, the ability to understand their needs and then serve them in the channels which they are really excited about, where they are interacting. So they are now having higher degree of interaction with the brands. they are able to do this in a much more personalized manner. They're able to express themselves. And a lot of this will happen thanks to Web 3.0 and the decentralized technologies. You'll be able to do a lot of these payments in a micro-transactional. You're able to kind of program your money with some of these central bank digital currencies and some of those stable coins. You'll be able to kind of program money to behave the way you want it to on top of these platforms. And enterprises will have another source of data to be able to personalize a lot of experiences and operations, right? The death of cookies, we've already heard, right? How it is changing the way experiences are being designed from a data-driven perspective. Metaverse is going to be that opportunity is, hey, we made a lot of difference in terms of the experience to the customers, our targeting of customers, our sales and marketing efforts were really powerful given the data-driven approach that cookies allowed us to do. Metaverse is going to enable a lot of this thanks to the decentralization of a lot of this, and then the access that is enabled by this. There are several other concepts which I'm very excited about, which are being done at a very not just at an organizational level, but at a government level, at an industry body level, at collaboration between different governments and so on and so forth. The big ones definitely are self-sovereign identity, the ability to kind of do identity management at scale for not just real assets and real people, but virtual assets is going to be really huge. The ability to be looking at digital identity as a project, digital currency as a project, looking at digital wallets as a project on top of metaverse is going to be very exciting. So if everybody thinks wallets has been one of the greatest innovation in payment technology, I think wallets on Web3 and metaverse is going to take it some multiple levels ahead. And we do see this to be like the great thing we're excited about. But at the same time, there are areas which we want to talk about caution. So the first one we keep hearing a lot in the market is around decentralization of data and internet, and the ability for consumers or users of the data to control what data gets shared or what application features get used, what gets deprioritized and so on and so forth. I think one of the things we need to understand is, as all of us as consumers, we consume thousands of apps, we look at several websites. We don't have the time and the energy to kind of give permission to each of these, right? We don't have the interest as a consumer to kind of check on, okay, what data is provided to whom, who has the permission on that, right? So this added effort on the part of the consumer or the owner of the data, if the individual is the owner, is going to be a massive challenge, right? If I have to say that. So this true decentralization is something of a massive caution that we wanted to give to our our listeners today, because what we want to talk about is there are benefits of centralization. It gives you great experience, it gives you consistency, there is trust in the systems, organizations create the trust. So trying to replace that with decentralization and creating a lot of work for the users is something which we want to kind of create caution for. So as Yugal said earlier, right, it's not about decentralization of the internet, but it's about the hyperscale system that we are seeing is where we are excited, because that's where the true pragmatic enterprise applications are there. I know, Pranti, you're going to talk about all of those today, but I'm really excited to kind of talk about those use cases, how we are seeing it across the board. The third one, I think is going to be very important, is we talk about permissionless and we talk about architecture which is collaborative and open. All of this is great, but as we look at enterprise security, as we look at creating experiences with privacy concerns around this, some of these become challenging as we look at scaling them up. And also the scalability of the underlying infrastructure becomes challenging, so that what happens is you can scale it to 1,000 users, somewhere to 10,000 users. Hey, if I have 1 million users, some of these technologies will not work. So, hey, the enterprise scalability starts getting challenging if we look at that. And last but not the least, the regulatory environment is something which we want to talk about it. So we all hear a lot about Web3 and saying that this will allow lesser regulatory oversight. And again, it's not true, right? So again, we've looked at digital assets revolution with Bitcoin to all the other cryptocurrencies that we've seen. Regulations will come as there is adoption. customer protection, protecting the economy. All of these things are responsibilities of our governments and the regulatory bodies, and they will do that. So if anybody's thinking that this is a way to avoid regulation, I would say that's not the idea. You should go after this. That's not the purpose behind these technologies. So that's where we are. And I thought, Yugal, if we can also talk about from a Web3 perspective, what does that architecture looks like, right? Because one of the questions we've got through the registrations for this webinar is, what are the components of the architecture? So if we can go to the architecture slide and look at how that kind of plays out, I think that will be helpful.
Yeah, I think, I mean, so we believe, as I said earlier, right, that the first step to all of this is demystifying, okay, understanding what the heck is going on. And I believe the first step towards it is to create a mental map that, all right, Web 3.0 and Metaverse probably look like this. And these are the building blocks, because, all of these building blocks have life of their own. And the good thing is we all understand them reasonably well now. So be it the use cases, be it the access point, which is through either web or through AR, VR and things like that, the entire developer and creator economy, and then virtual spaces. I think somebody also asked in the Q&A panel, whether enterprises are building metaverse across different platforms. So yes, they are. And currently, I think most of those platforms continue to be proprietary and their own. So there is very limited portability. But from a sourcing and technology leader perspective, both on the buy side as well as supply side, is that understanding the moving part, what all constitute this is the first step. And if I have to take one of these as where probably we do not focus that much, I would say it is the entire security aspect. Somebody asked in the registration questions that, what is going to be the role of security. So the cyber security is of course important, but beyond that, almost all the ills of social platforms are going to get mirrored to a metaverse as well. And we already saw multiple news clips that harassment have started to happen. Then you have a lot of NFT scams that are happening. So net of it, I think we human beings are very, very strange creature, that we know how to mess up good things, and this is one of those, that despite the fact the opportunity and potential this entire platform gives us, there are some caution which Ronak also talked about, that we will have to think through security a little more. We will have to think about the entire content moderation in metaverse as well. In addition, the fundamental building blocks, which we already have, let's say the cloud services, edge services, network, 5G will come and probably accelerate it. So all of those things will become important. And as a business leader, understanding these, and then how do these act or work with each other, and then within all of these, which all ecosystem partner would you want to work with? And we will talk about this this later as well. But then before that, Ronak, why don't we get down a little more around, how can we drive some sort of, complete business transformation out of what we've been saying?
Yeah. No, again, Yugal, I think this architecture, I think, is really powerful, right? Because assembling all of these components together and kind of bringing the ecosystem, as you said, is important. But the key thing is aligning it to business goals. So we've been studying CXO goals across enterprises, and we've been kind of, doing this across, by lines of businesses, industries, by technologies and themes. And we've kind of, synthesized, if you look at on the left side of the slide, there are 3 key CXO priorities. The first one is we want to have differentiated asset monetization. We want to be able to use the data, the assets that we have and be able to kind of, generate new revenue streams around it. Okay, so I have a great, event that I'm putting together to launch my, product, right? Say, let's say Samsung kind of launching their new set of devices and, products on a metaverse kind of an event. They are creating participation tokens and providing that token to each participant. The token in itself has value, and you can use that to kind of buy products, to kind of, use them in terms of exchange and create value out of it. So what we've done is, hey, we've created value out of something which is as simple as participation in in an event, and which is really amazing, right? So if I have a gaming environment where there is a lot of virtual estate where you can do advertisements, now I am creating an environment where you're able to kind of lease some of these. You can create interactive experiences within that. So now a gaming company, in addition to advertisements, can create interactive experiences within the games, within the metaverse environment, to be able to do monetization. So asset monetization becomes important. Product innovation, as Pranati mentioned, right, is one of the big themes that we are seeing. And again, metaverse, Web 3.0 is all around that, which is, we talked about wallets, the ability to kind of program wallets and do microtransactions thanks to Web 3.0, and the ability to then do this on several platforms. I think that becomes really important. And the last but not the least is value transformation. Everybody wants to do value transformation, or the other way to look at it is value delivery. How can I do delivery of value to customers in a different way? Everybody's talking about business model reimagination or business transformation. That's a key priority, and Web3 and Metaverse allows that. And as you're trying to do that, what we've seen are the action items that are being taken. The first one is, let's think about how do we look at experiences of people. It's not just the experience for our customers, but for all stakeholders, be it employees, be it shareholders, or the broader community at large, right? And then the point is, it's not just about one single virtual land, all right? It's not one single metaverse platform. There are several of these. There are several of these tokens. There are several of these digital assets. How do you create and orchestrate all of these ecosystems so that they can work together? Because the value doesn't lie in these isolated islands, but the value lies in the interoperability of this. And we have several customers that, who are now working towards providing that interoperability between multiple metaverse platforms that they're investing in. What they're trying to do is, if I built a particular experience on one metaverse platform, I don't want to rebuild again, right? Not spend so much effort in development efforts. We want to do that in a way that there is interoperability that plays along. And the third piece is, we just want to do the business the same way we were doing. We want to change the game. We want to change the experience. We want to change the product. We also want to change the way we do commercial models, the way we sell, the way we engage our customers. So we are seeing business model innovation across the board that are happening thanks to Web3 and Metaverse. But the key thing as you do all of this is about, how do we do this in a way where we are just thinking of the stakeholders as not just the customers and the employees and the partners, but also the broader community at large. So, examples of cyberbullying, now there is metaverse bullying, right? So how do we ensure people are treated fairly? How do we ensure that we are creating an environment which is diverse, equitable, inclusive, and people feel belonged to the different metaverse environments? So the DEIB initiatives that you're doing for your own organizations, ensure that when you're building these metaverse platforms, they're designed around that. How do we ensure that the environmental implications of those are managed? So I think it's going to be very important is, as we are thinking of, okay, let's make profits and revenue and differentiated experiences, we are driving sustainability goals for Web 3.0 and Metaverse. So I think that's going to be very, very critical as we kind of build that. And as we kind of think about that, I thought, Pranati, why don't you kind of talk us through, right, again, what's happening in terms of the adoption?
Yeah, and that brings us to the next poll. Yeah, I think we, as you see, what is the readiness of your organization, organizational capabilities for Web 3.0 and Metaverse? Are you in the early experimentation phase? Are you planning to scale your adoption in the near term? or are you waiting for more clarity on this market? So yeah, very interesting. I think very interesting dynamics are emerging as the poll results are coming in. Let's just give a couple of minutes, I believe, and then we'll have the results. Yeah. The dynamics are such that it's going in either of the extreme directions. So that's what is happening, I think, from the polls. Okay. 3, 2, 1, and yeah. So we have the answers. So almost almost half of our listeners here are still awaiting for more clarity on this market, and I think that is something which we were alluding to, that there is a lot of we need to take a very pragmatic approach to Web3 and metaverse, and I think that is what is happening. More regulatory clarity, more clarity from the ecosystem. The next one is, we are in the early experimentation phase, and I think this is again is something which is corroborating with our research, that we see a lot of experimentation happening. Some of these, and we will talk about some of these use cases in detail. We saw some of the examples. I think Yugal and Ronak, you've already highlighted several of these examples already. So yeah, I think this result is really interesting. Moving on, let's I believe, Yugal, you would want to explore on what the technology and sourcing leaders they should do when it comes to these emerging technologies.
Yeah, so I think there are, like, what we said in the Web3 and metaverse architecture, there are multiple moving parts, but at the end of the day, as a business leader, you will have to make sense of those. So what we've been working with our clients are telling them, okay, focus on 4 broad themes. One is around the use cases. What is relevant? And I saw on the Q&A pop-up as well that a lot of people are asking, okay, what is relevant, let's say, from a customer experience perspective? What is relevant from a life sciences industry point of view? So those are very interesting and relevant questions to ask. So then understanding as a 101, what are some use cases we can target in the near to midterm? Now realize the operating word is near to midterm, because the way things are evolving and shaping up, it's very difficult to predict what is going to happen in the long term. So keep your feet grounded and then say, okay, these are the use cases we are going to prioritize, and we will come to some of them in the following slides. And then the entire talent conundrum, which all the talent war going on, the talent is short both at the buy side as well as the supply side. And now you have these new cool technologies emerging, which everybody wants to work on, but nobody really knows. So then how do you take care of this talent equation in this entire adoption journey? We spoke earlier of the ecosystem. We fundamentally believe that nobody will be able to do this alone. If you are buy or supply side, doesn't really matter. You will need to work with your ecosystem partners. And then you will have to focus on your service partners. That is going to be a binding agent to your ecosystem. That is going to bring all of your partners together to create value for you. Otherwise, there are so many moving parts. What we saw within each moving part, there are so many technologies that as a consumer of it or as a provider of it, you will feel exhausted. So then relying on some interesting and reliable service partner, be it existing or be it new, is going to be important. So starting with the use cases in the following.
Yeah, so we've studied all the recent investments that were made by the entire ecosystem. I think you've already highlighted that, what will this ecosystem entail? It will entail the enterprises, the startup ecosystem, the system integrators, or your services partners, and last but not the least, your technology or platform providers. We see a common thread that is emerging across all these investments, which is taking, and it came out through our, our survey also, that, enterprises are taking a very pragmatic approach to some of these use cases, be it around gamification, which is something which we see growing since a long time now, given the industry's affinity to virtual reality. Training and onboarding are some of the other avenues where we see a lot of activity happening. And again, this is centered around, our experience innovation concept. You're building better experiences for your employees. So that's also something which we see, we see the adoption at a very, very high scale happening, across different pockets, across the entire ecosystem. Then after that, when it comes to the immersive experience of metaverse, we'll see massive shifts emerging in training, education, and work. So the idea is that, you experiment now, you make the mistakes in the virtual environment, and then you learn, and you do better in the real world. So that's also an approach where we see where some of the industries are taking. When we look at the adoption levels or the relative adoption levels across different industries, we cannot say that there is a maturity continuum here. A lot of enterprises may just skip simpler use cases or certain generations and directly invest in those areas which are very pragmatic and that meet the unmet customer or investor needs. So I think Ronak alluded to the point around pragmatism. So this is I think what is coming out of our research as well. We've also seen that some of the complex use cases such as your smart city infrastructure or decentralized clinical trials, which is happening in different industries. So again, these are some of the complex use cases, but again, there has been an uptick in pockets and silos. As adoption dynamics, these are going to mature, we will gradually move away from some of these quick wins to some of the high value use cases. This will need several of the moving pieces to come together. It will need an alignment with the consumer needs of the hour. It will need an evolution of your consumer behavior, buying patterns, and last but not the least, regulatory clarity. I think we'll talk about this in subsequent slides also. And I think Ronak also highlighted the challenge around interoperability. So how do you realize value? I think this interoperability is going to become huge. We don't have to solve for specific platforms, specific applications, but we have to look at operability across different jurisdictions, because if you do cross-border payments, suppose for an example, you have to look at different markets, different geographies, different different regulatory regimes. So again, these are couple of things which will sort of shape the adoption dynamics in the future. Last but not the least, talent needs to be ready. And I think you highlighted this point around talent, and we have got this question around, how do we tap into the talent ecosystem, leveraging, some of these technologies, some of these emerging technologies. So again, we believe that, we will need talent, which is not just specific to some of these next gen capabilities, but at the same time, the talent needs to understand what is the industry context you are dealing with. So that is going to be the key here. I think you want to explore on the ecosystem play for.
Yeah, I think all of this, all of these use cases eventually need a very, very strong ecosystem that both the supply and the buy side need to work with. And it's less about what we have today. There are like hundreds and thousands of technology companies who can provide you some solution, but what is going to happen in the future as well. So for example, if you see, and it's very interesting, right? One of the building blocks, which is the cloud computing, the cloud hyperscalers have not really come out with some very clear messaging or offering around Web3 metaverse. Neither have the ISVs or the enterprise platform vendors. We saw, I think, Salesforce launching its NFT cloud. We saw Adobe doing something metaverse, but more or less, I think a lot of this continues to be driven by the startups, the smaller companies, And if I go to the, when we work with our enterprise clients, they are very fascinated. And this we see in most of the new technology cycle. Whenever newer technologies come in, generally the first reaction of consumer is to work with newer players. But once it transitions into a little more mature adoption, that's where they end up relying on their other established and scaled partners. So what we say is, yes, ecosystem, of course, we have been talking about it during this session. The number of companies will continue to change, evolve. There will be different areas that will emerge. So for example, if you currently see any metaverse platform or any virtual platform, the avatars are terrible. So the simple things like building human-like avatars, right, which is a 101, but even that isn't there. So that will of course become important. We earlier touched upon on the security aspect. That will become very important. How do you bring artificial intelligence so that you can fundamentally secure your metaverse as well as your Web3 deployments? And given the fact that Web3 applications are massively big and complex, so doing the typical observability is not going to work. So you will have to bring a lot of automation to it. You will have to bring a lot of data centric insights to it, where your workloads are, what all components are they running in, and then one very interesting problem the industry will probably try to solve is that generally, fundamentally, it has been seen that people have found scaling blockchain based applications to be very expensive. So they would want to get into solutions that are more cost effective, because without that, it will become a challenge to have distributed applications that can scale as well. We believe all of these players that are here are going to up their game. They are going to uplift their offerings around Web 3.0 and Metaverse, be it a hyperscaler, platform vendors, or the service provider and the consulting firms. Because I think the technology companies, the startups and the hardware and software companies, they are running much faster than the other ecosystem. But then other ecosystem has to come together to create value. Otherwise, this will create the usual challenge that happens with any technology of frustration. And I think Pranati did speak about talent, but if we just touch upon it further, Ronak.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think we've been helping several of the ecosystem participants who are very early adopter to figure out their talent strategy, from how do they time the market right on skill development efforts, because we do see the half-life of some of these skills is kind of shrinking. And what that means is, if you don't time the market right on skill development efforts, and once this technology comes into the scale adoption stage, you are left behind and you have to hire from the market, and it becomes really expensive. So we've been looking at several skills across Metaverse and Web 3.0. There are almost 65 odd skills that are the most popular ones. And we thought we kind of bring some of these up here. And again, it's very critical to understand that if you look at this slide as almost like a red and an orange red, which is basically saying that, hey, the demand supply gap is really high for the skills already. And at the rate at which the demand is kind of scaling, we do see the supply will not catch up very soon, which means it's a great opportunity for folks to kind of, look at careers. But at the same time, enterprises who are really serious of experimentation and then, proactively scaling that up, they need to start thinking of talent. So this is going to be very critical in terms of understanding what are the base skills, right? So if I already have a Java developer, can I cross-skill them, upskill them to become a metaverse engineer is going to be a question, right? So do I already have people doing blockchain application work for us? Can we move them to this area? Or we have people who are designing experiences on traditional channels. Can we bring them up out here to kind of do that? So identifying existing people in the organization and how do we create career pathing and skill laddering for them. So which is about how do I get there to build this talent, and then what talent to build is going to be very critical as a question that needs to be answered. So again, this is something which we want to really emphasize is talent is going to be a core differentiation for people who succeed in the market. And hence If you look at large banks like JPMC or, HSBC trying to experiment with those virtual lands, that's for that same reason. They're building talent in their organization by experimentation of all of these. The value might come in some other ways, right? They might create some great payments use cases, lending use cases, crypto use cases on top of it. But again, building the talent is going to be very critical. So Yugal, one thing we wanted to definitely do is also talk about what are the implications for sourcing leaders, how do they evaluate services partners? So, why don't you
So
talk
I think
about
one
that?
is the entire, the service partner should be able to jumpstart the journey. That is important. See, it is very easy to get lost in details and all this complexity, but then as a sourcing leader, you need to hold your service partner accountable. That okay, forget about all of this. How can you help me jumpstart my journey? That should be the first question, and then looking under the hood, because you will get a lot of service providers who will claim a lot of things without having anything beyond the PowerPoint. So they will say we have these many assets, that many assets. How do you validate those, right? Talk to them whether have they hired the typical techno creative thinker, because this problem is just not a technology problem. You need a lot of creativity to solve it. Some of them have actually built interesting offerings around lab as a service, which is an old offering in starting from many decades, but it has been now used for metaverse and web 3 dot as well, so that enterprises do not have to spend so much money just reading their infrastructure and their platforms to start something. So this lab as a service offering can jumpstart some of these enterprise journeys, and service providers need to have it. Otherwise there is going to be a problem. And I think we spoke about all of the what enterprises need to do, but then there are broader regulation and regulatory impact. Pranati, why don't you touch upon those?
Yeah, you will, if you look at, the regulatory, the regulatory landscape which is emerging, we see, we don't see a lot of clarity in terms of regulations. So we, if we look at how the regulatory landscape should shape as, it should be in the best interest of all the stakeholders. What that means is, it should not be just focused on the customers or the employees or the shareholders. We have to look at the entire ecosystem, and I think Ronak already pointed this fact around. It has to look at the overall community at large. That is how we build the regulatory guardrails. There were several questions around aspects such as ethics and privacy. So yes, that is something which is very necessary, given investor interest is of utmost priority. So how do you protect the investor at the end of the day? It's going to be very important. We do not want any cyberbullying happening. We do not want anyone tampering with the avatar or the persona in the virtual world as all of these scale. And last but not the least, we need to address aspects around inclusion and diversity. The world needs to be more purpose driven, and I think this is our purpose framework. We've already spoken about it a number of times. So we need to be more purpose driven as we scale our adoption dynamics for metaverse and web 3.0, rather than just be driven by wants and needs. I think that brings us to the question and answer segment.
And again, we would also want to highlight before we kind of get into the Q&A is we do give you an opportunity to talk to our analysts who can contextualize these insights to your specific areas, to your priorities. So, do let us know if that's an area you want to kind of hear and talk to our analysts we want to do. So getting to the questions, we're getting so many, and I don't think we'll be able to answer all of them. We've been trying to answer a lot of these over the Q&A tab offline, but I thought the one that we want to answer is, yes, we will share the material post session. So definitely you will get a link to that. I think Yugal, why don't we start with some of these questions? Let me pick one for you. How do we see security, fraud prevention, governance, risk and compliance evolving in Web 3.0 and Metaverse? And I think, Pranati, you might want to answer the second part of the question is, how is regulation going to play out on these platforms?
Yeah, so I think one is, as I said earlier, the human-driven security will have to get significantly augmented through automation, because these things cannot be done manually. So that will become important, given the fact that these distributed applications will run wherever they want, on blockchain, cloud services, edge services. So as systems become more complex, the attack vectors increase. So the exposure area increase, which means enterprises and providers who are building these Web 3.0 metaverse type of systems will need to take care of security. One is the cyber part of it, which we said. Second is actually the content part of it, whether what you are posting, whether, let's say, the avatar which is roaming around, how secure are they. So there are multiple of those dimensions, and then eventually the enterprise will be held accountable by the regulator. So this governance and risk and compliance role will change, which means in addition to the sourcing leaders, the GRC leaders need to understand where this Web 3.0 and metaverse ecosystem and the entire landscape is going, to do a good job, and not only to protect their company, protect their customers, protect the society, their brand. Otherwise, this is going to be a big challenge.
Yeah.
Rati?
Yeah, you will, and again, very rightly pointed out around, how the risk office should evolve. We also see that, when it comes to, privacy and disclosure, there are several intricacies around, what is the type of disclosure? What is that? What is that going? How is that going to affect someone's privacy? Are they going to have certain implications, some certain serious implications on, on the metaverse, as well as on in the real world? How will those dynamics play out? And the second bit is around, when it comes to different geographies, different jurisdictions, how does a decentralized internet, how does that how does it handle concerns around control, around individual applicability of certain laws? And last but not the least, how do the different how do the different interoperable platforms, how do they play out? I think that is going to be very crucial when we look at aspects around privacy, disclosure, investor protection, all these aspects.
Yeah. And also, I think a lot of this will have to be designed with a zero trust kind of an architecture, which we've talked about from a security perspective, and creating that governance model around it. One question that I definitely wanted to take, because I know our HR team will love that. There was a question is, what are the opportunities at Everest Group for folks who are interested in Web 3.0 and Metaverse? So we definitely have several opportunities. We are hiring analysts, we are hiring a practice leader. So we're growing the team. This is a fast growing area. So definitely, if you're interested, check out our job portals and we'll be happy to kind of answer more questions. Another one that we wanted to take was around question around decentralization. And the question was, how will, if everybody's going to, consume a lot of the Web 3.0 and metaverse infrastructure via hyperscalers in an as a service model, won't that lead to centralization? I think one thing we want to caution here is, looking at IT infrastructure consumption in an as a service model, we should not equate that to the decentralized architecture of the applications and the data that we are setting up. So we could still have decentralized applications and data, but the infrastructure as a service that we are consuming can be centralized. So again, that tooling and other things which is already being built, we definitely encourage, right? So why reinvent the wheel that is there? So definitely that's there. One question that was also coming in, and again, I think, well, this might be very important, is what are the customer support kind of activities in Web 3.0 and metaverse? From a customer service perspective, we already got questions around content moderation, trust and safety. So, and again, we've talked about data privacy, data security and regulations. So customer support in Web3 definitely will be a critical theme. Yugal, anything you want to add on the customer support, customer experience in Web3?
Yeah, I mean, if you see I was reading the UAE police now is available in Metaverse. So that's a different type of customer service. right? So when a police department can be there, you can think of the possibilities. And I think Ronak did touch upon it, that some of the banks that are opening those virtual lounges, in addition to talent, that's also a customer experience part to it. And then eventually, of course, lot of, what we said many months ago, that if this becomes just one more channel to serve customer, it is going to defeat the purpose, because this has to monetize that customer experience rather than just become one more channel to serve the customer. That's not what metaverse should be used for. But I think we are seeing more and more inquiries coming from clients, both from buy and the supply side. And given we have a dedicated customer experience research, they've been kept very busy answering some of those questions. But then this is a very interesting space, continues to evolve and continues to excite.
Yeah, I think one question we got was on use cases in industries like manufacturing or freight railroad, and I can take that one. Is we are seeing some horizontal use cases around employee engagement, employee safety, employee training, employee onboarding. Those are there across industries. We are seeing some of those specifically from an health safety training perspective. Some of them are being done in virtual simulated models across metaverse. That's something which we're seeing. We're also seeing a lot of product design collaboration between teams in the manufacturing world happening in metaverse. So I can have a virtual, completely distributed team can kind of co-create on an product using the metaverse kind of concept. So we're starting to see that happening. Overall, from a supply chain perspective, we do see a lot of investments into Web 3.0 technologies to create networks, right? So that you're able to not just talk through between buyers and sellers, but also between folks providing letter of credit, insurance, customs, and all the other regulators kind of coming together on networks. So we are starting to see that in some of those areas, right? So it's not just the B2C use cases. There are a lot of B2B and product engineering use cases that we are seeing in the Web 3.0 space. So we are at the end of the hour for us. I know there are several questions we were not able to answer, but what we will do is we'll go through those offline and we'll definitely share our responses with all of you on those questions as we go along. Yugal, and Pranati, any last comments, closing comments from your end?
No, just that it was me presenting, not my avatar.
Yeah, and I believe I'm closely watching how the BFSI space evolves as these concepts become more mature. It's very, very exciting and happening to see. Yeah.
Thank you everyone, and look forward to meeting you in the virtual world. Take care.